Ladies and gentlemen, it's wonderful to be able to welcome you here to the Legislative Assembly of New South Wales. The heart, the beating heart of representative democracy in New South Wales. It's not the Legislative Council, I'm sorry, Stuart. It is definitely here where we have 93 electorates represented by obviously 93 members. Just before we get into the nitty-gritty of it, 69 members elected in the coalition in 2011, only 18 elected for the Labor Party, and the rest were represented by the crossbench, which was where I sat, right up there on that back bench up there. No, oh, your supplementary question? Who was the Premier? It was Barry O'Farrell. Barry O'Farrell, the O'Farrell slide as it was known, and it was the largest win of a party in the history of the Assembly. Extraordinary period of time. So with that, welcome. I am Greg Piper, as I was introduced, and I'm the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly. I am also the independent member for Lake Macquarie, and I hope everybody knows where Lake Macquarie is because it's definitely not Port Macquarie, okay? So Lake Macquarie, just an hour and a half up the M1, and I have been a member of Parliament since 2007, so I can assure you I've seen quite a bit in my little over 16 years. It's a lot of changes have happened here. I wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet this evening, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I also acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people joining us here tonight, or who may subsequently watch this presentation. By acknowledging the country in Parliament, we aim to continue breaking down barriers and building trust across communities. This evening, we meet in a place that has not always made laws to help or empower Aboriginal communities. And can I just say, personally, it's a little bit of an understatement because I think this Assembly, the New South Wales Parliament, has, unfortunately, at times been complicit in making the life of our First Nation peoples worse. Our Parliament strives to now make things better by continuing to work alongside Aboriginal communities into the future. So, welcome to Petitions, the power of voices. Each year, I understand the History Council of New South Wales organises a celebration of history known as History Week. And this year's theme is, as we know, Voices from the Past. We at Parliament decided to use the theme as an opportunity to think about how everyday voices are communicated and heard in this place. And while I say we here at Parliament, I want to say that's the fabulous staff that we've got here who are so wonderful at engaging with the community. There are a number of ways in which this can be achieved, but one such way that has stood the test of time is petitions. Petitions allow members of the public to directly place their issues before the Parliament. It helps raise awareness of issues and alerts members of Parliament to the actions that the community want. It is also a practice that has evolved over its rich history. I cannot think of a better group to discuss petitions than the presenters we have here before you tonight. You will be hearing from Jenny Gallagher, who works as Committee Officer in the Legislative Assembly. Jenny has recently published a paper on petitions in New South Wales and will be sharing her insights with its history this evening. Hayley Jarrett, Senior Education Officer from the Department of Parliamentary Services, who will be speaking about a historically significant petition from 1888 on display tonight. And I had a sneak peek. It's fantastic. It's absolutely amazing, the history there. Janelle Toke, Research Officer, Legislative Assembly, and Stuart Smith, the Clerk Assistant Procedure from the Legislative Council. Now, Janelle, along with Madeline Hollins, I understand, who can't be here tonight, are the officers who look after petitions in their respective houses day to day. Now, I understand that Stuart and Janelle will be talking about contemporary practice and how you can get involved in petitions today. Now, I am sure that tonight will be highly engaging and informative discussion for everyone, and I sincerely hope that you will enjoy tonight and learn something new about our democracy. Now, before I hand back to Hayley, I just want to say I did go to my go-to source of information, Google, and just checked out where the first petitions were recognised as being from. I'm sure people of interest in history would know this. Come on, where was the first petition that was recognised in history? Has anyone got any ideas?
Egypt.
Who said that? Perfect. Egypt, by workers working on the pyramids. The second petition that was observed, historically speaking, was in relation to workers on the Great Wall in China. Whether it was called China then is another thing, or Egypt was called Egypt, but that's the source of the first to recognise the oldest petitions. So we don't have anything obviously quite as much of that, but petitions are a very important part of this place. If you can get a significant enough petition, and certainly people take the interest in a topic, then it's very hard for a politician, for this House, not to take it seriously. So I hope you have a wonderful night. Thank you very much for joining in. It's a great use of the Legislative Assembly, and I just love looking around here and seeing you all here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your warm welcome. We've been able to teach each other something this evening. I learned something then as well.
Give it later.
Yeah. And thank you to all our presenters tonight for taking the time to share the exciting history of petitions in New South Wales. As Mr. Speaker has introduced, this year's theme is Voices from the Past, and what a perfect place for this year's theme. The word parliament comes from the French word parler, to speak or to talk, and here in this chamber and across this parliament, many voices have been heard across the ages. However, tonight we're not focusing on the big names that have come through this parliament, but in the way that everyday people have had their voice heard in this place, both in the past and today. So our first speaker tonight, we'll invite up in a minute, is Jenny Gallagher. As we heard a bit about Jenny's role in a moment from the speaker before. So in 2021, Jenny completed a graduate certificate in parliamentary law, practice and procedure. And as part of that course, she was required to write a paper related to the work of the Parliament. Jenny at the time was working on a project digitising the papers of the Parliament and saw many interesting petitions, which inspired her to write her paper, Petitions, A Voice for Sharing Our Social History. And it was actually selected to be published in the Australasian Parliamentary Review, and she has kindly agreed to share what she learnt with her research with you tonight. So thank you, Jenny.
It's nice to see so many faces, familiar and new, and how amazing is it that we get to hold this here in the chamber. So as we know, tonight's topic for History Week is petitions. And chances are, at some stage, you've been asked to sign a petition. You may have signed it, you may have even created one. And that petition was created because the issue was important enough to a person and the people who signed it to ask those in power to take action or to make or prevent change. The voices in petitions can reveal what was important to people at different times, and tonight we can discover some of the social history in New South Wales through petitions made to this Parliament. I will present 3 case studies that I wrote about in my research paper, and I'm happy to share my research paper with anyone who's interested. The petitions we examine are all available on the Parliament's website, and I will look at one from the 1800s, the 1900s and today. I'll show that they're a rich, valuable source for our state's history, told by people who were living through the events and the experiences. So it wasn't written by future historians analysing a time that they didn't live through. It's people's real experiences. So we know that our state has a very long social history, as our Indigenous people have lived here for 60,000 years. But because I only have access to material from European settlement onwards, I'll be focusing on the early 1800s until today. Just for a bit of background, I might be stating the obvious, but I just wanted to put it in context. So the English explorers claimed this land for the British Empire in 1770, and from 1788 started sending people to settle here. So for a while, Australia was made up of separate British colonies across the country, who eventually all had their own parliament, government and laws. New South Wales was the first and oldest colony and the first to have its own parliament. So you may have heard in the tour that we have the first parliament here. And Australia became a nation on the 1st of January 1901 when the 6 British colonies united to form the government of the Commonwealth of Australia. So the first petition that I'll be looking at is when we were still a British colony. Like many practices inherited by the newly established colonies, the right to petition was brought over to New South Wales. Before the establishment of the New South Wales Legislative Council, early residents had to write to the Parliament over in England if they wanted to complain or make a request. When Parliament was here in the early 1820s, people could now directly petition the politicians here. In September 1829, 41 years into colonial life, the first recorded petition was received. By default, it also became Australia's first recorded petition. And I'll put it up on screen. So I'm not sure how well you can see it, but you can see that it's very old. It was handwritten. So it was called the writer was against a new bill being considered by the new council, and it was a petition against the slaughter of cattle bill. So I've translated it for you and I'll read it out. So it says, "To His Excellency the Governor and the Legislative Council, having laid out a considerable sum of money at the very extremity of the town adjoining Mr. Dixon's steam engine at the waterside, in the erection of a commodious and convenient slaughterhouse, I hope the above circumstances will allow my claim to be favourably considered by the council assembled, having taken the contract at a low rate, and any removals would be attended by a very serious loss. I have the honour to remain your humble, obedient servant, Henry Brooke, Sydney, 7th of September 1829. Now, looking at it and hearing it, it's very short and it doesn't really make much sense. So to understand, I had to do some research. I was looking at, well, what is the bill that the writer is complaining about? So a bill, which is a proposed law, so it's something that's introduced here, members will debate it, and if they agree on it, it will then become a law. So a bill was introduced here for the Parliament to address cattle stealing in the colony. During the 1800s, cattle theft was widespread, and Governor Macquarie reported that the practice of stealing bullocks, oxen and other cattle prevails to an alarming extent. In my research, I saw that in the month of November 1827 alone, 20 people were put on trial for stealing cattle. While slaughtering or selling stolen cattle could relieve immediate hunger, holding on to the animals was a way to build wealth in the colony. So colonial New South Wales was land rich but money poor, so obtaining cattle, particularly if it was stolen, encouraged people to move outside the already established areas and use the animals to settle on and claim land further out into the interior. The animals also generated wealth for their owners as there was a demand for their beef, and each farm workers were each being rationed between 3 and 4.5 kilos of beef per week. They could also provide needed products for the colony, such as their leather. Their untreated skin and hair could be used in ropes, whips and for mending. Their fat could be used for grease and an ingredient in soap and candles. And the collagen from their skin, bone and horns could be used as glue. They also had the physical power of being useful to plough land and clear trees. Being so valuable, a lot of cattle theft took place in the colony, so the bill was introduced to try and address the issue. The bill aimed to control the butchery of cattle by requiring all cattle slaughterhouses to obtain an annual licence and provide notice of their planned slaughter. Government inspectors could visit the slaughterhouses and inspect, and failure to produce a licence or produce evidence of the animals could be punishable by fines or jail. There are other interesting things in the bill too. So it's saying the bill states that people who want to apply for a licence need to apply at the magistrates nearest to his, her, or their usual place of residence. So the use of her indicates, even though females were greatly outnumbered in the colony at the time, it was considered socially acceptable for females to own or be in charge of a slaughterhouse. Another part states that nothing in this Act contained shall extend to prevent any persons from slaughtering cattle for his or her family, servants or labourers, which provides a description of the house, the picture of the households during that time, with many having convicts or free convicts taking on paid work to serve for them. Finally, the reference to no slaughterhouse or place for slaughtering cattle should be licensed in the town of Sydney assists us today in understanding where the boundaries of the town of Sydney were at the time via the location of the slaughterhouses. I then looked at who wrote the petition. Although we can't be certain, my research using census and other records revealed Henry Brooks was likely to be the son of Richard Brooks, who was a British ship captain who transported convicts to New South Wales. Later becoming a free settler, Brooks Sr. was granted land by Governor Macquarie at Cockle Bay, where he kept cattle, and set up a successful business supplying meat to the public, ships and the government stores. The neighbour referred to in the petition, Mr. John Dixon, was a significant early settler. He migrated to the colony in 1813 and brought the first steam engine, which is mentioned by Brooks. This steam engine commenced 2 years after it was brought over and powered a flour mill, which helped provide bread to the colony. Records show both men were granted land at Cockle Bay, which Book references in his petition as being on the extremity of Sydney town, which I guess today Cockle Bay is the Darling Harbour area, but back then it was the extremity of the town. So combining the information provided in the petition with further research, we can see that during the 1820s, Cockle Bay was considered the outskirts of the settlement. The colony had both a steam engine and an abattoir in operation. Cattle is being farmed there and local beef is being consumed as part of the early colonial diet. For my next case study, I decided to look at petitions made in the 20th century, so the 1900s. And I decided to look at petitions made following the arrival of AIDS. It's now known to be caused by the HIV virus, but at the time, all petitions referred to it as AIDS, so I'll use that terminology in my talk. The petitions, and there were many of them, were fascinating, but it also made for uncomfortable reading. I considered writing and presenting on a safer petition or topic, but I decided when examining history, we should look at the positive and the not so positive to gain a deeper and more realistic understanding of a time. Now, to understand the attitudes and some of the responses to its arrival, I looked at the social environment at the time of the emergence of AIDS. As British colonies, all settlements within Australia inherited the law-making homosexual acts illegal from the United Kingdom, and they were maintained by the colonial governments. Following Federation in 1901, responsibility of its status fell to state governments, who continued the practice of keeping it illegal and subject to punishment. During the late 60s and 70s, lobby groups emerged seeking to decriminalise homosexuality, And in 1978, a march for gay rights in Australia took place in Sydney, with arrests being made and people being publicly named. And this march gave birth to the annual Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras, which is celebrated today. The New South Wales Parliament received many petitions speaking out against the arrests and showing support for the gay community. However, a few years later, in the early 80s, petitions received had a less tolerant view and opposed any changes made to laws that would legalise homosexual activity, gay marriage or adoption of children. So these petitions showed a first-hand example of the level of public homophobia that existed in some of the community at the time. So homosexual activity remained illegal in New South Wales until 1984, and it was in this context, people who were gay often being seen as other when a new mysterious illness arrived. The virus, which in its early days was viewed as a death sentence, brought fear to much of the community and added fuel to the homophobia of the day. So the first, the AIDS virus first appeared in healthy young males who were gay, and it later emerged to intravenous drug users and prostitutes, which aligned this new disease to immoral behaviour of many. When cases of AIDS being contracted through blood transfusions were seen in children and straight adults who were not injecting drug users, increasing fear struck the general community, and there were cases where a 3-year-old Eve Van Grafthorst, who had contracted AIDS via blood transfusion, was banned from attending her local preschool as there were fears she may infect other children. There was also a national television ad showing the Grim Reaper targeting men, women and children and warning if it's not stopped it could kill more Australians than World War II. So those sort of scare tactics meant that there was a real fear by a lot in the community, and that was combined with a limited knowledge of AIDS and how fast and wide it would spread, as well as gaunt images of people affected by the virus. So rather than being seen as victims who deserved sympathy, gay men were often viewed as deviant with the potential to inflict the virus onto normal people. And these fears can be seen clearly in petitions made to the Parliament and included in... So I struggled about whether to include this content, as it still happens in many people's lifetime, and I didn't want to upset or offend anybody, and I didn't agree with what was on their viewpoints, but I decided, since it was on the public record, it is important to show these as an example of a period of time, just to help with understanding the bigger story. And I also wanted to state that I don't agree with or endorse the views, I just want to show it as an example of a particular time in our social history. So I put a copy of one of them then. The petition shows there's a fear around a new, little understood virus and the attitude towards people they felt were responsible for it in the 1980s. The references to homosexuals and a promotion of a healthy heterosexual lifestyle reveals an anxiety about the gay community who are viewed as others and wielders of the disease. But as I mentioned, it demonstrates an article during a particular time, but I think it should be examined as part of a bigger picture. So the story has gotten better. Medical research and advances mean HIV is no longer a death sentence, and the annual World AIDS Day is openly supported by many public figures, including New South Wales politicians from different parties who have spoken their support for the community living with and working with the HIV virus. In another sign of change in social attitudes, the recent Anti-Discrimination of New South Wales annual report showed very low levels of vilification and discrimination. So on to happier topics. My final case study is from the 2020s. So on the 12th of October 2021, the following two petitions were presented to the Parliament, the New South Wales Legislative Assembly here. The first one states, the laws recently changed in Victoria to allow pets in any rental property, and the owner had the right to request a pet bond should any damage occur. Pets are part of the family, can be mental health assistance animals, and should be allowed to live anywhere without prejudice. Please change the law to reflect the fabric of a modern family and allow pets in rental properties. And the same day, another one said, Sydney ferries currently allow dogs on ferries when the dog is contained within a box, crate, basket, etc. Such a rule is both onerous and unnecessary. It acts as a deterrent to the use of an essential service. It doesn't meet community expectations of Sydney being a dog-friendly city. The petition calls for a relaxation of the rules and Sydney ferries to take a more dog-friendly approach to the provision of services. So these two requests emphasise the role and value of pets in our lives today. The desire for pets to be accepted as a norm for rental properties and to have a more dog-friendly approach on public transport shows that New South Wales is part of the global trend of viewing pets as part of the family. The view of pets as family members today, rather than property or working animals, is supported by people spending money, increasingly spending money on pets, with gifts for pets being marketed and purchased. Major retail businesses like David Jones and Westfields in the Queen Victoria building offer pets with Santa photos along with those offered to children. Kmart's have multiple aisles dedicated to pet products and novelty clothing. Hotels promote pet stays. And the major Australian insurance companies now offer pet insurance. So there are three examples that I used over different periods of New South Wales. I think petitions are special because they are written by people living at a particular time. They're sharing a story not written by the victors, the educated or the elite with their biases and world viewpoints. They allow us to hear from everyday people and those often left out. So women, the poor, migrants, those without high education levels. It's important to keep in mind, like anything written, that arguments being made in a petitioner's request are likely to be one-sided to present the case as most favourable to themselves. Like all historical documents, we should consider what could be missing in the story and where it could be found, or review petitions with an opposing argument for balance. History is opening up to hearing and considering different viewpoints to allow for a more shared history. Accessing petitions as a source of social history allows to hear a viewpoint to either confirm or challenge assumptions at the time. They provide an alternative source to textbooks or the traditional narrative and can be enriched by hearing from those who did not leave many records, such as migrants who wanted to assimilate quickly. So next time you're asked to sign a petition, consider adding your voice to speak on an issue that future generations and historians can look back on to see what was important to you.
Great, thank you so much, Jenny, for your talk just then. I really enjoyed it. I hope everyone else did too. Which means Jenny's going to be so happy I put this up here. This is a QR reader that actually connects to her full paper if you would like to work out the technology to do that. You can also find it online in the Australasian Parliamentary Review, Spring-Summer 2022, Volume 37, Number 2, which you'll all recall. So this might be a bit easier, or if you ask Jenny or myself later on, we can send you a direct link if you want to read the paper in full. So I'll be speaking for a little bit about a petition that we will have on display this evening. If I can ask my lovely assistant, Wes from our facilities team here. Yeah, give it a, yeah, might need a drum roll. Thank you very much. I would like to thank the Parliament Library, in particular Joy and Flax, but also Wes for his help too, ensuring that this could be on display for you tonight and get here in the room safely as well. I'll be speaking about this petition here, this hefty petition, which was related to a local infrastructure request. And it was presented to the Legislative Assembly in 1888. That was by the member for East Sydney. His name was George Reid. This is the same George Reid who later on went to be the Premier of New South Wales in 1894 and the Prime Minister of Australia in 1904. So, what was this big petition concerning? The cover will actually tell us. So if you can't see it there, hopefully you can here. On the leather-bound covering in gold letters, it reads, City Railway Extension Petition, presented by G.H. Reid, Esquire, MLA, which means Member of the Legislative Assembly, 28th of November, 1888, 64,029 signatures. And the forward addressed to the Speaker and the Legislative Assembly tells us what they were requesting. One, that urgent need exists for the extension of the main line of railway to the deep waters of Port Jackson at Circular Quay, and that such extension had been repeatedly promised by successive government. Two, that nearly 4 years ago, your Honourable House passed the vote for such an extension, and 2 years later, plans and book of reference were approved, but nevertheless, and notwithstanding, the promises above referred to, the work has not yet been carried out. A work required not only for the benefit of the metropolis, but to meet the trading and commercial requirements of the inhabitants of the whole colony. So, like with Jenny before, I'm just going to give a bit of context to the time and place which would have brought about a petition like this. So in 1888, there were no railway lines going through the city, or what we now think of as the Sydney CBD. Beginning in the 1840s was the development of getting the idea of a railway system anywhere here in New South Wales. It was, however, at first focused more on the movement of goods and produce. And it was very important that all those goods and produce could get to the water so that it could be then sent to other colonies of Australia or exported elsewhere. It was how we were going to make money. But in 1855, what I'm going to refer to today as the Sydney Terminal, although it has a few names in history, first opened, and it was in an previously undeveloped land between the modern-day Central and Redfern stations. At this time, it was actually considered the outskirts of town. And at this time, ending the station just outside the city made perfect sense. It avoided unnecessary air and noise pollution in the middle of the city, which at the time was still largely residential. It also avoided the expense of acquiring land and the issue of displacing people from their homes or businesses. However, it was increasingly clear that it was becoming impractical and expensive to move goods off the train in the middle, well, what I think of as the middle now, near Central Station, and moving it through the city. Just 1 year after the railway opened, engineer in charge, John Whitten, determined that an extension to the city should be made a priority. The way that this would have worked at the time, they actually would have had to load all goods and produce from the train and then transported it to the city. It would have taken human and animal labour to do so. It was considered a bit of a waste of time. It caused expense hiring people to do this. It created more issues. There was another place when moving goods around, things could be broken or spoiled. Apparently they actually had a bit of a reputation for that happening. And it created additional traffic in the city. Also, increasingly, the railway was being used for passengers. Passengers, likewise, were left stranded at nearby Central Station, and they had to make their way to Circular Quay. They might be able to hire a cab. This is the kind of cab that would have had a horse attached to it. A little bit later on, they'd be using trams. But again, another expense on your expensive journey. So, for our 64,000 or so petitioners, the solution was simple. Extend the railway from Central to Circular Quay. As the petition stated, proposals and plans had already been made. They were agreed to, and successive governments had actually promised to take action. But still nothing had happened. And in fact, here in the Legislative Assembly, questions were raised again and again by members. I'm going to share with you my favourite answer. So one member asked for an update on the City Railway Extension Project on 1st of July 1884, and here was the answer. These important questions will receive due attention, and the determination of the government will be communicated to the House when their railway policy is made known. So lots of big words in there, but didn't really say too much. So people who signed this petition wanted to take things into their own hands. So throughout 1888, an organisation, a sort of community group called Sydney Railway Extension League, conducted meetings at town halls across the city and state with aldermen present, members of the parliament and prominent businessmen. And that's how they were able to collect these over 60,000 signatures. It indicates to us today, studying this time, that clearly they were working pretty hard and they were very passionate about this cause too. Now, possibly because it was such a large petition, this petition was uniquely bound, as you can see. The people made responsible for that are called Sands and Company. For anyone who studies history, which I trust there's a few people in this room, you might have done family history and actually used the Sands Sydney directory in the past, and they're actually the same printers responsible for that. Now, this was considered such a novelty at the time, it was actually put on display at the printers on George Street a couple of days before it was presented to the Parliament. The Daily Telegraph described it at the time as a most ponderous appearance, meaning that it was quite hefty and difficult to move around. It measures at 47 centimetres by 26 and 13 centimetres deep of signatures. I had a chat with Wes and Flax over here, who were the ones responsible for getting it on display tonight. It needed 2 of them to get it up here safely, and I think we concluded it weighs about a newborn, so pretty heavy. The Daily Telegraph also described it as handsomely bound, which I agree, perhaps you do too. Now, when George Reid attempted to present the petition here in the Legislative Assembly, it actually triggered a debate in the House. Another member brought attention to the standing orders. If you missed the tour before, the standing orders are the rules that the members agree that they will follow when conducting business in the House. The standing orders can change, but at the time, Standing Order 18 stated that a petition must be in writing and no printed or lithograph petition shall be received. I could probably get into more detail, but for the purposes of this evening, lithograph is just a style of printing that was used in the 19th century. Now, I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here, if you'll allow me. There was actually another petition presented to the Parliament, completely unrelated to this one here, and most of the people who had signed it were from the Typewriter Association. And they actually presented a petition to the Parliament in 1894 requesting that the Parliament begin accepting printed petitions, so it could actually be a new form of employment for those typewriters who were all female as well. So, back to this petition though. When it was presented to the Parliament, and this accusation that perhaps it weren't real signatures, but that it was printed instead, one member of Parliament, his name's William McCourt, I believe his name's up on the wall actually because he went on to be the Speaker. He'd apprenticed as a printer, and he actually volunteered to inspect the petition to make a decision about whether it was printed or written. Another member of Parliament, an older member, his name was Thomas Garrett, he actually stated to the House, I taught that honourable member his trade and I will look at the petition. Now you can't get tone from Hansard, but that's how I assume it was said. And Mr. Garrett determined that it was not printed, it was not a lithograph, and therefore it conformed with the standing orders. He actually stated to the House, I am sure it was written and it was received by the House. Now, it was, at the time, the largest petition presented to this Parliament or any Parliament in Australia. Now, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the population in the colony of New South Wales in 1888 was just a little over 1 million people. So if 64,029 people signed this petition, that represents 6% of the population in the colony. Just to give you a bit of a one-for-one understanding in today, that would be if we had a petition today in New South Wales and about 480,000 people signed it, close to 500,000. So you can see, kind of get an idea of how many people were interested in this topic. Now, the Australian population at the time was just shy of 3 million, so about 2% of the overall Australian population, obviously concentrated in New South Wales, signed this petition. However, I should point out that not everybody in New South Wales would have been counted in any of these statistics at the time. Now, George Reid stated to the House it had signatures from the city and the country. So who actually signed it? We've got one selection of the pages of signatures here. And with that many people on it, it certainly does represent a diversity of people. And it tells us that the petitioners were not exaggerating, that this actually would affect everybody in the colony. On this page, this selection here on this page, people who signed it include a baker from Glebe, a coachman from Burwood, a bolt maker from Homebush, a storekeeper from Petersham, a clergyman from the North Shore, and a draper from Pyrmont. And the furthest away I could find on this page at least was someone signing from Coomera. Now, tonight's theme, Voices from the Past, and as we heard from Jenny before, is to consider these documents, what it tells us about people in the past. This tells me that this was clearly of great importance to many people in New South Wales, and perhaps to a diversity of people as well. I think this petition is emblematic of how petitions can literally shape the shape of our state. In fact, some of you here tonight may have arrived here on a railway that came through the Sydney CBD. That's only how I got here today. And while we can't know everything about all these individuals who signed it, this might be the only thing that remains from those people. We know what it suggests, what was important to the community at the time. Now, a question I have been asked, so I will answer it. How successful was this petition, or any petition? To be honest, it's really never easy to judge whether a petition is successful or not. There are so many factors that play into part for such an outcome, particularly an infrastructure project on this level. But probably saying petitions relating to infrastructure probably aren't very successful, certainly not at first, historically. If you think about it, it's very obvious. The scale, expense, coordination and legislation necessary for the project to take place. Even though 60,000 people wanted it, it didn't mean they all wanted the same thing. So there were actually many proposals made throughout the 19th century, but someone always had a complaint about it. So the railway was going to go down George Street. No, we don't want that. How about Macquarie? No, what about Phillip? Every single street in New South Wales at some point was put up for option as to be where the new railway would go down. There was a reoccurring idea of taking reclaimed land from Hyde Park, and that was often opposed by the community, not to lose that green space for a train station. So there was inquiries done, there was lots of reports made. One in particular highlight was the Royal Commission. There was actually a Royal Commission. The Royal Commission on the City Railway Extension produced a report in 1897, and they considered the plans to build a Sydney Central Terminal at Hyde Park on the St James Road side, so the side we're on tonight. And this would be for passengers only. We had gotten to the end of the 19th century, things had changed in the colony, goods and produce were leaving Sydney and New South Wales in different ways, so this would just be for passenger use. It was an estimated cost for this station at £600,000, which sounds pretty good today. I assure you it's actually in the millions though, in today's money. Now, there was also an alternative route considered through the city. It would go straight through from modern-day Central to Circular Quay. The government, in order to achieve this, would have to acquire 20 acres, that's 8 hectares of land, and it wouldn't even include the land for any stations, just for the tracks. Now, this acquisition alone would cost over £3 million, which is starting to sound a bit more like Sydney real estate to me. Now, Underground Rail was considered, but at this point was rejected and shelved for later on. There was just no practical way to get a steam train with smoke produced through the middle of the city and vent it correctly. It was just as complicated as putting a railway on the ground level. So, unfortunately, for our 64,029 petitioners, they would have to wait till the 20th century for their city railway extension. So, I'm just going to briefly go into what that was. I'm just going to let everyone know I'm not a train expert, so forgive me, but this is the general idea. This is a map from 1926. It was done by Carhill, and sort of outline, you'll recognise, if you can see, what we expect of our railway in the Sydney CBD today. The highlighted circles, the red closest to me on the left, is where Central Station is, both in this map and today, and the projected Circular Quay station on the far right there, and where it stands today. So to begin, our city circle and getting an extension into the Sydney CBD began with the construction of the Sydney Railway Station in 1906, or it opened that year, and it did bring the terminal a little bit closer to Circular Quay by about a block. So it wasn't really about getting it closer to Circular Quay, it was about more addressing other issues with the old station, things like how the platforms were too short, there was not really clear ways for passengers to move in and out safely of the train station. Now, the first underground stations were built in 1922 for Museum Station and 1926 at St James's Station. Following after that, we have Town Hall and Wynyard stations, which were opened just 3 weeks before the opening of the Sydney Harbour Bridge in March of 1932. And then, finally, the city circle was complete with Circular Quay Station opening in 1956. A full 68 years after this petition was presented to the Legislative Assembly. So as you could probably picked up then, this project is linked with another large infrastructure project that also had multiple petitions brought to the New South Wales Parliament, the Sydney Harbour Bridge. In fact, in 1896, there were 7 separate petitions related to the North Shore Bridge Bill, as it was known then, including 3 on the 20th of May, 1896, all on the same day, 3 of those. So, petitions are a century-old tradition. First you petition to the king. I've just learned it's even older than I thought from Mr. Speaker earlier. A little bit different today, not directly to the king to have your say. You can start a petition, you can sign a petition, and it will be presented here by your local member or any one of the 135 members across our 2 houses. Signing a petition is important not just to let your elected members know your concerns and issues and what you'd like presented here in Parliament, but it's also important for future historians to learn what our communities were thinking and what was important to them. And I think this petition is indicative that it can be slow to bring about change, especially on this scale. I think it's important to note that it's still democratic and that eventually these petitioners were successful. That's all I'm really going to talk about tonight. Thank you very much. We will be having... Yes, we've got time. I was a bit worried then, for our next presentation. So our final speakers tonight, as introduced by the speaker before, is Stuart Smith, just in case we've forgotten, Stuart Smith, Clerk Assistant for Procedure in the Legislative Council, and Janelle Telk, from currently a Research Officer in the Legislative Assembly. Thank you. Together, Janelle and Stuart will share how petitions practically work and how you can get involved today. And while this may look rather adversarial, that is why members sit on either side of each other in Parliament, I assure you it's all very friendly. So we're going to have a bit more casual chat now. All the formalities are over. We can take a deep breath. And I'm just going to ask a few questions to Janelle and Stuart, and they're going to share from their experience. So we've heard a lot about paper petitions tonight, but are there any other ways that we can present a petition to the House other than paper?
You actually can. So we've recently developed e-petitions, which are electronic petitions, and they're usually lodged through Parliament's website. And so an e-petition is essentially the same as a paper petition in the sense that it's addressed either to the Speaker of the Assembly, the President of the Council. It usually has a grievance, which is the issue that the petition is about. It then also has a request, which we call the prayer, and that request usually stipulates an action that the House should or shouldn't take in regards to the issue.
Excellent, thank you.
There you go. And in fact, the Legislative Council, as well as Janelle said, also has e-petitions, and they're to go out and get all your community to sign a paper petition. You've got to be out at the shopping centre, you've got to be out in the rain, you've got to be out in the wind. So a much easier way of doing that is to do it via a computer, where people can access it through their mobile phones, their laptops. So it provides quite a modern, convenient way to petition the Legislative Assembly or the Legislative Council.
And do we say there when they were introduced to both houses?
They were introduced in the Assembly in August of 2020, and it was against the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. So it was quite opportunistic in the sense that it was a time when people couldn't really go around and collect signatures. They weren't really able to move around freely. So it was really good timing in the sense that we received a lot of petitions at that time.
So we talked a bit about this, but maybe continue, about the advantages or the disadvantage of a paper versus an e-petition.
Shall I do e-petitions and you do paper petitions?
Sure.
Okay. So it really depends on the petitioner, on the topic that you're interested in talking about, and also about your audience. I mean, it's really important to consider the access to technology that your the people you want the signed petition would have. The benefits definitely are that e-petitions are accessible on all devices. They're very quick and they're very easy to create and to sign. There is an element of informed consent because we have a privacy policy that discloses how your information is being stored and what it's being used for. It's also really good in the sense that it's a much more efficient way to ensure that your petition complies with the standing orders, because with e-petitions you actually have to you send it to us and we have to review it before it's open for signatures, so it complies with the standing orders, whereas with paper petitions, often we receive them and they're not really compliant, and unfortunately we can't process them because the standing orders say that we can't. Another really important fact is that there can be really good mechanisms to see what the community is interested in, because you can see online which petitions are open and what amount of signatures they have. So you can log into our website, you can see maybe a petition has 20,000 signatures on a certain topic, and that kind of gives you an indication of what the community is interested in at that time. I think the most important thing, though, is that e-petitions present the opportunity for increased engagement on the department's behalf. So when you sign a petition, an e-petition, you can opt in or out of receiving updates about that petition. And so what that means is that when the petition is tabled in the House, or when the ministerial response is due, or when it's debated, we can send updates and even links to the videos for the debate so that you're able to know about the progress of the petition. With e-petitions, with paper petitions, unfortunately, that's not necessarily the case.
I feel like this is a bit of a debate in terms of the advantages of the e-petitions and the traditional paper petition. Ladies and gentlemen, I put to you, in another 100 years' time, will Hayley come and do a presentation and unveil an electronic petition? I say no. Actually, e-petitions are a marvellous innovation for the Parliament, but from a historical perspective, nothing beats being able to sign a bit of paper and have that paper perhaps bound in a booklet like that and tabled with the House.
E-petitions can't be burned.
E-petitions can't be burned. Paper petitions can. That's true too. E-petitions may be on a hard disk that gets lost. No, not with the Parliament's e-petition system. However, one big advantage I find from perspective of members of the community getting paper petitions is actually engaging with their local communities at their shopping centres, more often than not on the streets, and it gives them a chance to actually speak to their community, speak to people, talk to them about the issue they're concerned about, and then go, would you like to sign my petition? So it really gives them, the members of the community, and that opportunity to talk and engage with their community. That's, from my perspective, the biggest advantage of a paper petition. But from a parliamentary officer perspective, those e-petitions are wonderful things.
Thank you. So I want to present a petition. How many signatures do I need to get?
There are quite a few milestones. I think the most important thing, which is common across both houses, is that all petitions, regardless of its type, when they receive 500 signatories, we then have to direct them to the relevant minister for a response, which is then due 35 days after tabling. And this is a really important accountability mechanism. And so that information is also published because it becomes permanent record. Something that is unique in the Assembly that the Council doesn't do, actually nowhere else in Australia does in terms of parliaments, is petition debates. So in the Assembly we have petition debates for paper petitions which meet the threshold of 10,000 signatories, and for e-petitions it's 20,000 signatories. And so what happens is we table those petitions, and then on sitting Thursdays at 4 p.m. we have a debate about the contents of that petition. And usually what will happen is the sponsoring member of that petition, 4 other members and the minister will speak to it. And then afterwards we have a vote to take note of the petition, and it becomes part of our formal record. Petition debates are fairly recent though. They were introduced in 2011 and they were an election commitment of the then Premier Barry O'Farrell. And it was kind of his idea to enhance participation of the community of New South Wales with Parliament. Petition debates are also open to the galleries, so you are welcome to come and watch them. We do have full galleries often when they're on, and we also broadcast them. And that's another thing with e-petitions, is that when we have a debate, we can send a link out to people who opt in and they can watch it live, which is also really great for engagement.
I think it's also important to note that a petition can be presented with just one signature on it. You don't need to have tens of thousands. Again, in our house, the Legislative Council, that's the red house, located on the other side of the building, any petitions with over 500 signatories, we send it off to the appropriate or responsible minister, and then the minister has to respond to the House within 35 days of how they're going, their response to this petition. So they could be agreeing with it, they could be saying what they're doing about it, or they could be stating that we acknowledge their concerns.
Thank you. So, do you have any tips or tricks for me in creating a successful petition?
we actually have a template on how to do the best petition ever. The petition should state who it's from, residents, citizens of New South Wales, for instance, or residents of a particular locality. Your petitioners request that the House will, the petition will state an issue or a problem, and then they will request that something be done about the problem. So it's identifying an issue, then saying what we want to be done about it. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I would say more broadly, especially with paper petitions, we do advise that you reach out to us for advice beforehand, because like I mentioned before, it's really unfortunate when we receive a paper petition and someone's gone to the effort of collecting 10,000 signatures and then it's non-compliant. So it's always a good idea to send us the text. We kind of approve it, send it back, it's compliance, you can go off and collect your signatures and it's all good. But also I think I'd just like to reiterate what Stuart was saying about having a really clear and strong request. That's the most important part of the petition. Really think about the action that you want the House to take or to not take in regards to the issue that you're petitioning against.
Thank you. This will be my last question. I did say I might throw something at you. So this is a History Week event. You're both responsible for managing the documents that come through our Parliament, the oldest Parliament in Australia. Do you have a perspective on what it's like to be holding the responsibility of that collection?
Well, petitions are permanent records, as we know. I still receive paper petitions, not quite bound beautifully like that, but we do receive them and we keep them. They're permanent records. So we table them in the House, either by the Speaker or by the Clerk, and then we send them off to State Archives and we keep them forever and ever, and they're actually accessible to the public, so anyone can go in and see petitions. And so I think because they are permanent records, inherently you look at them with a historical lens, and as we've seen through the presentations today, they can be really good tools at identifying what the community was interested in or what issues we had at a certain point in time. And definitely that happens till now. For instance, sometimes something will happen in society and then I'll come into work and then I'll look at the portal and there's a bunch of e-petitions about a relevant topic that happened over the weekend. So they can often be reflective of what's happening in the community.
It's interesting you say that because our largest petition was in 2004. And our been received in the Legislative Council, and that had 500,000 signatories to it. And the issue of that was, it was related to the deregulation of pharmacies. And now, how many years later are we? 20 odd years later again, we've got the whole issue of pharmacies and scripts and all those sorts of things in the news again. So it's interesting tracing all these issues and seeing how they evolve over time. We haven't had a petition yet about that, but maybe the Commonwealth government has, because that is basically more of a Commonwealth issue. But yeah, it's actually, as a parliamentary officer, it's a real privilege and responsibility to be accepting these papers and petitions and recording them and storing them for the posterity of the state.
Thank you. What a great note to end on, I think. Thank you very much to Janelle and Stuart for sharing with us your experience. We can give them a round of applause.
Thank you.
And I would like to thank all our presenters tonight for their work and their research and participation. I would also like to thank Mr. Speaker for opening tonight's event. And thank you to Mr. Speaker and the President for their support to our public programs. He did say it, but just reminding everyone, Mr. Speaker actually represents the electorate of Lake Macquarie, so not around the corner. So we do thank him very much for his attendance tonight. And finally, I would like to thank everyone here for attending. This evening would not be possible without you. Please consider attending one of our future events. If you want any information about our events, please speak to me. After the event, we have a newsletter that you can sign up to. If you're curious though, the next event we have planned is on Tuesday the 17th of October as a part of our Parliament Unpacked series, which will occur on a sitting night, and it will feel very different, the building. There'll be a lot more people around, bells are ringing and people running around too. And you'll hear from a panel of ministers and shadow ministers to learn about their role and that they play in Parliament. In the future, you'll also receive an email from us to ask about your feedback about this evening and anything you'd like to see in the future here at the Parliament of New South Wales. We would love to hear from you. One last thing. Finally, we had 2 books for sale out in the Fountain Court. One's a cookbook created by a catering team. Now, I've personally tried to follow the recipe for the barramundi. Now, mine was not as pretty as the picture, but I think it was just as tasty. And it's called Dining at New South Wales Parliament. And another book for sale, which is actually focused on the over 200-year history of this building, is called Rum Hospital to Parliament. Now, in lieu of having like an answers and questions, which was going to be a bit technically difficult in this room, you are welcome to come and have a chat if you'd like to know a little bit more. But people are already running off. I know we're hungry for dinner. So when you're ready to leave, we'll be heading out this doorway here. But I would like to say thank you, good evening, and we'll see you at our next event. Thank you very much.